The Philadelphia Eagles traveling to New Orleans to take on the Saints. Can Nick Foles do it again, Sam?
Team of destiny. Nick Foles.
There's a little bit of hyperbole
Double
going
doink.
around. A little bit of hyperbole this week. Our friend, was it Peter Schrager that said it on Good Morning Football?
They must have been smoking something on that show earlier in the week. Because
Don't mess with my friends at Good Morning Football.
I think on the same day,
sorry, Peter
Schrager
Kyle,
said that
Nate and
there's
Kay,
no quarterback he would take all time in a clutch situation over Nick Foles. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the NFL past the year 2017, but there were players like Tom Brady and Joe Montana, and many
still playing.
Many very clutch players over the years that have played in more than like 5 playoff games.
No.
I'm just saying there were a lot of very clutch guys over the years that played in more than 5 postseason encounters and did some pretty spectacular things in big moments. I might take one of those before I took Nick Foles, despite this being the most recent thing that's ever happened. So that was lunacy, right? That's just a ridiculous take. That's like Skip Bayless-esque. The other one that came out on the same day was Nate Burleson, who said that the Patrick Mahomes no-look pass was the single greatest thing he had ever seen in all of sports.
He's done it multiple times, though. He did it in the Big 12.
All of sports. The single greatest thing that's ever been achieved in all of sports.
What about Secretariat? Triple Crown.
This was the single greatest thing he had ever seen in all of sports.
Yeah.
I would suggest that is also lunacy.
A little bit of hyperbole from our friends over there. So Nick Foles, probably not the most clutch quarterback of all time.
No.
But just people keep using this phrase, which I agree with, one of the weirdest careers of all time.
Yeah.
When you look at all the different things he's doing. I don't want to write him off again.
I'm not writing him off.
But things are really stacked against them this week against the Saints, right?
So we've said this, his 2 games in the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl last year were like 93, 94 PFF grades.
Right.
What's weird is that his run now, it's been good, but it's been bizarrely consistent. Like it's been 79 basically every week for like 4 straight weeks. We've been talking about this guy having the single
I don't think
highest
he's got
variance.
93, 94. That's so rare.
But he has it in him. We've seen it.
He doesn't have it in him again this year, but it's so rare.
Well, my point is, if they're going to win this game, he's going to need to get closer to 90 than he is 78.
No, that's fair. I agree. Yeah, because last week he had 2 interceptions last week. One of them was iffy, but he had the same throw that Trubisky made.
One of them was terrible.
That was the roll and just chuck it into the end zone right to the safety. That was bad. He's got to cut back on those. But just the throws that he's making under pressure, he's number 1 in passer rating under pressure during the regular season. Again, we know that's unstable, and we talked about this last week. He stands in there and he makes those throws. And I feel like this is the game. It goes either way. He's going to stand in and make those throws and look like a star again, or they're going to lose by 50 again.
Yeah,
there might be something in between where it's a competitive game. But in the games where he's been spectacular, Nick Foles, the downfield passing game has been incredible. And maybe is this too cherry picking the stat here? In the NFC Championship game, the Super Bowl, and then the last 3 weeks of 2018.
This is the one where you're like, if you limit it to just as good games, this is
but
the
it's
number?
still crazy because these are those like big games down the stretch where they had to win.
Okay,
essentially. Okay,
right.
The big games where they had to win. Essentially, 12 for 20 for 469, 5 touchdowns and an interception, passer rating of 122.9 on deep passes. That's crazy. And otherwise, he's 3 for 22.
Yeah. So there's 2 things that the Eagles need to happen for them to have a real shot in this game. One, Nick Foles needs to get closer to the NFC Championship / Super Bowl Nick Foles from last year than he has been so far, even understanding that he's played well generally so far. The other thing that needs to happen is the improved secondary and coverage of the Eagles needs to have another insane game, right? Because their selling point in defense is that they still have the best defensive front in the game, more total pressure than any other defense, the best win rate, the best pressure rate of any defense. But the Saints will do what they did to the Bears last week, which is just get the ball out quicker.
Yeah, Drew Brees last time. Sorry, for all of the pressure that the Eagles get, and their trio of Fletcher Cox, Michael Bennett, and Brandon Graham combined for 230 pressures. That's number 1 in the NFL. We've talked about Fletcher Cox a bit here, 95 total pressures. They only got to Brees 8 out of 30 dropbacks, which I know off the top of my head, Sam, is 26.7%.
You shouldn't be able to do that.
I can calculate
straight away
percentages in my head.
It's ridiculous.
That's 4 for 15, which is a 267 batting average, which is 26.7%.
Yeah, no.
It's a gift and a curse all at the same time.
Yeah.
Anyway, 26.7% is about 8% below the NFL average. That's way too low. So the best defensive front in the NFL could barely get a hand on Drew Brees in the first matchup. That's why they lost by 1 million.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And that's the problem, right? Is that if your secondary can't hold up its end of the bargain, you can kind of take away even the best pass rush in the NFL by just getting the ball out of your hands quickly. So
Right.
the Saints are the kind of team that does that anyway. You know, they're pretty good at doing that as a general matter of course. If that's the game plan, like the Eagles need to have an answer for that. And the answer has to be those guys in the back end having ridiculously good games. Now,
that's Trey Sullivan. He had 3 pass breakups last week. Trevon LeBlanc
had a monster game last week.
Russell Douglas, Avonte Maddox. I mean,
Maddox,
all of those guys.
Right. And Maddox kind of started off having this great game until they actually went after him. He was coming after them so aggressively early on with those almost interception, just couldn't get the feet down. He was breaking on that first move so aggressively that Chris on the broadcast was like, oh, Avonte Maddox is like, he's having himself a day. They better be careful going after him. And actually the opposite happened because they went, well, hang on, look how eager he is on these passes. Yeah. We can actually exploit that with a double move. So rather than avoiding going after them, they actually exploited what he was doing and went, well, let's show him the first move and then hit him with a double move down the sideline. And then let's do it again and again and again until he stops doing that. So, but again, if you're going to get the ball out of your hands quickly, you might not have the time for the double move. You might have to go with the first move, and Maddox can make those plays. So those guys collectively need to have a big day. Otherwise, they're going to take away that pass rush, and then you're in trouble.
Drew Brees in the Dome, though. Can they do anything against Drew Brees in the Dome that's going to be crazy? Everybody's going to be excited. Sean Payton just brought the trophy into the locker room. I mean, they're ready to go.
I mean, I think the thing that does play into their hands a little bit is that, in theory, you know what they're going to do. They're going to try and get the ball out of their hands quickly. So you might be able to cheat a little bit and play that first move and not have to worry too much about the double move. Now, maybe it'll get you later in the game, but at least early on, you might be able to go aggressively after their stuff and get a couple of stops in there. And then, football is such an interesting game because of the sort of game flow that you can kind of change a game by just a couple of drives early on.
I will say it does seem like when they last played each other, we were talking about some of the busted coverages the Eagles had were like the most basic things, like a cover 3 corner who has no run responsibility biting on play action week after week. And I do feel like these guys have become more comfortable within the scheme. They've been able to do a little bit more, and they're a little bit more aggressive, at the catch point and everything. Some of the throws Breeze threw at the catch point in that last game, those guys were oblivious. There was one where it looked like the corner was in position, then he pressed the wrong button on Madden and ran away.
Yes,
it was like you accidentally hit the stick that that moved him away from the ball. I mean, so there were some plays that were just so atrocious back then. I don't think it's going to be as easy for the Saints.
No, it isn't.
They caught the Eagles at a great time to tear them apart.
They caught the Eagles. That was the game where all these guys were thrown into the lineup, and it was like, oh, God, like what have they been reduced to trotting out? But part of that was that some of those guys come back healthy, and then the other guys have had a bunch of games in the season to develop, right? These guys that were such a disaster when they were first thrust into action have actually become half-decent players in the back end. Guys like Avonte Maddox, albeit coming off a really, being exploited in the second half of that game. Trevon LeBlanc, Trey Sullivan. Like Sullivan was playing corner back then on the outside, getting toasted. Now he's playing free safety where he's more comfortable and playing well. So, yeah, it will be a different Eagles secondary, but I think that game at least shows how dangerous this New Orleans offense is and how things can go badly in a hurry if you don't get a handle on it.
Yeah, Michael Thomas, number 2 in the NFL in yards per route, 2.66, caught 86% of his targets. Saints O-line against that Eagles D-line, I think, is the matchup to look for here because the Saints O-line, only 7.7 pressures per game, second best in the NFL, 9th lowest pressure rate against the Eagles defensive line that we just put on our front 7 rankings at ProFootballFocus.com, number 1.
Fletcher Cox is the guy up front that'll need to have the big game because the Saints are very good in the tackle positions. They're probably going to limit the edge rushers. Also, if you're going to get quick pressure, it's going to come up the middle. So Fletcher Cox against those interior players that aren't nearly as good.
Or moving Graham inside.
Needs to have this dominant game where he just starts throwing people back into Drew Brees and trying to keep him off balance that way.
All right, who are you taking in this one?
Yeah, the Saints.
Also taking the Saints. Nick Foles' magic runs out in this one.
Oh, yeah. I guess it has to,
Now
right?
you're doubting yourself. This could be the other upset.
I'm not saying it's going to happen.
You
I'm
can
just
gain
saying
another
that
game on Nate.
there's another 15 points worth of PFF grade of Nick Foles' potential out there.
Well, Drew Brees, too.
Whatever.